Happy Halloween! And by that, I mean early November. That's right, it wouldn't be a Super Geek Mike Halloween-themed episode if it wasn't at least a little bit late. I've been doing that since the first year of this channel. It's kind of a tradition now. My costume is someone who voted twice. I'm a Republican's worst nightmare, and I'm also fictional. It's not a thing. Anyway, welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is a series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. And today we're going to talk about a video that isn't technically a Critical Role episode, but it might as well be, because we're talking about the time the cast of Critical Role played D&D with Vin Diesel. That's right, we got to see Bloodshot himself play D&D. Let's talk about D&Diesel. This video was commissioned by one of my patrons, Martin. Patrons at the Programmed Illusion tier can commission me to make a video about a Critical Role one-shot that exists outside of the core continuity of the main campaigns. Maybe it takes place within the same world as Alexandria, or takes place in some other world, but it's not basically part of the story of any of the core groups. So if you've always wanted to see me review one of the games run by Sam or Travis or Ashley or Marisha, or a one-shot Matt ran for one of their corporate partnerships or something, you can feel free to check out the Patreon. You can even just join for free, send me a message. You can find out which one-shots have been claimed, but that I haven't put out a review for yet, because I want to make sure you get what you want. I don't want you to have any buyer's remorse if there's a particular one-shot you want to hear about. You can ask in the comments below too. I don't always get a chance to respond there though. The best place is to ask me on Patreon. And my Patreon has other cool stuff like ad-free videos, polls to help choose future videos, and exclusive live streams for patrons. In fact, we're going to do another Patreon live stream later this month. The time is on the screen. I haven't figured it out by the time I'm recording this video, but I will have by the time I put this video out. So if you feel like supporting the channel financially and getting access to any of that cool stuff, and maybe choosing a future bonus episode of Critical Role Demystified, like this one here, check out the Patreon at the link below. Now let's talk about this one shot where the pacifier plays D&D for half an hour. But first, some context, because if you weren't part of the Critical Role community in 2015, you might have no idea how Matt Mercer, Travis Willingham, and Laura Bailey wound up at the same table as the male lead from Babylon AD. See, Vin Diesel has frequently talked about how he used to love playing D&D back when he was younger. Unfortunately, does not have the free time to play anymore, and you know what? Same. But, in fact, his 2015 movie, The Last Witch Hunter, had actually begun as an adaptation of his own D&D character, Melkor the Witch Hunter. His character in the film is named Calder, to avoid any copyright troubles from Melkor being named after a character from Tolkien's work. And so when Vin Diesel was doing press for The Last Witch Hunter, somebody at Nerdist thought it would be neat to have him stop by and play a game of D&D. After all, Nerdist's sister channel, Geek and Sundry, had this new show called Critical Role, where a bunch of nerdy-ass voice actors play Dungeons & Dragons, and the audience seemed to get a kick out of it. So a team was assembled. Players would include Travis Willingham as Grog, Laura Bailey as Vex, and two folks from Nerdist as the other two players. Jessica Shabat as the headmistress, who is a human monk, and Dan Casey as Dupont the Dwarven Rogue. And of course, Diesel would play Calder the Witch Hunter to help tie into his new film. And Matt Mercer would run the game. And so he designed a Witch Hunter class for Diesel to play, since presumably he felt that none of the character options in D&D 5th edition were really a perfect fit for that character. Now, technically what Matt did was he just took the Ranger and customized a few aspects to match some stuff he'd seen in the trailer for the movie, like a flaming sword and faster reflexes. And we'll come back to that later in the video. But here's the thing. Matt was under the impression that he would have 2 hours to run the game, which is already very short by Matt Mercer standards, but what can you do? When that's as much time as you have to play D&D with the guy from Boiler Room, you're going to make it work. But the thing is, when you're on a press tour, your publicity team wants to maximize the appearances you can make in a single day. So the day before the game, the session was cut down to only an hour. And then unfortunately, on the actual day itself, Matt was told he only had 20 minutes. So obviously that puts a lot of pressure on Matt to shave out nearly everything he had planned for the game. But thankfully, it seems like Vin Diesel himself was nice enough. He and Matt got to chat for a while before the game and nerd out about Tolkien, and apparently he said that Diesel was super stoned, which is fair enough. I don't usually partake myself, but I'll be honest, if I had to do press for The Last Witch Hunter, I'd probably get pretty high too. But despite the pressure Matt was under, he made the best of it. So now, with all that preamble out of the way, let's talk about the game where Matt, Travis, and Laura got to play with the guy who almost played Blackagar Boltagon in the MCU back when they were definitely going to make an Inhumans movie. Now, this game is actually canon within the world of Critical Role. It takes place just before the live stream started, when the characters took a 6-month break to go their separate ways and get up to some downtime to help explain how they changed from Pathfinder characters to D&D 5th edition characters. This helps to explain why we only have 2 members of Vox Machina present for this session, on an adventure with 3 new faces. It also gave Matt a chance to set this game in his own world in a corner we just hadn't seen in the live stream, a small village called Braunbog in a swamp. However, this also means the players are level 8, since that's what level the party was when they started the live stream. But this also means that Vin Diesel, who probably hasn't played D&D in 10 years at least, is now jumping into an 8th level character in a new edition that he definitely doesn't know, and with a character class that nobody else at the table can help him with because it was customized for him. But it seems like Matt has basically memorized the math on Calder's character sheet, so when he rolls his damage, Matt knows what dice he has to roll and how much to add, which means the minute he can see the dice on the table, Matt can just add it up himself and add the modifier and just announce the damage. Personally, I would suggest, typically I would suggest not doing a level 8 one-shot. Usually that gives new players way too many options. Usually want to do a one-shot for new players somewhere between levels 1 and 5 because you're juggling the tension of giving players lots of options of what they can do in their turn. That's the benefit of playing higher level characters, but you also don't want to overwhelm them. But for new players, I would also try to suggest giving them a simpler character sheet. They should really only have to look at one piece of paper in front of them. Everything they need to do should just be on one page. Obviously, if they get hooked and they want to play more regularly, there's nothing wrong with having the spells on a separate page or another page for their inventory. That's sort of a necessity based on the level of complexity we expect from D&D. But it seems like Vin Diesel only has to look at one piece of paper in front of him, and everything he needs to do is on that page, and I absolutely think that is always the correct call. So when the game opens, Matt introduces the premise of the game.
The small village of Braunbog has recently come under a baneful curse. The young are born deformed and demonic. The denizens are driven to madness, some suicide. Those that remain, stubborn as they are, have fallen silent. But the nature of this curse has drawn the attention of one man.
I am Calder the Witch Hunter, the 800-year-old immortal.
Okay, obviously we have a more theatrical introduction than we typically get with episodes of Critical Role. In fact, we get a very small cold open, which is much more common with Campaign 4 than it ever was with any of the first 3 campaigns. So we have this more theatrical introduction, which is Matt really designing this session for the format that he's been given, which is not just presentation as this sort of piece of promotional material, but also as a very limited time. He's trying to maximize the drama rather than do a lengthy introduction. But then we get what I think is a really interesting moment and potentially a lesson we can learn from. Because Matt then tells Calder that he's familiar with these types of curses, and they're not just done to create misery for the sake of it, they're actually done specifically to promote pain and suffering and prepare the area for some future dark ritual. And then Matt tells Calder that he, Calder, assembled a group of adventurers to help deal with this threat. And at this point, the other characters introduce themselves to the audience. So let's take a look at what we've been presented with so far. Even setting aside the cold open that only introduced one character right before the title card, you're probably not going to do something like that at your table unless you're filming it for a circumstance like this. But even setting that aside, we have one person as the one player who's been presented as an expert in this current occult behavior. And he's also the guy who assembled this team of other heroes. This episode has a main character. Not terribly surprising given the format. Now, this episode was recorded in between episodes 26 and 27 of the Vox Machina campaign, so we at this point are only a couple weeks into the Briarwood storyline. The party had already had their first brush with the Briarwoods at the palace, and in the next episode they were going to finally decide to head out to Whitestone and confront the Briarwoods there. And obviously that storyline is very much focused on Percy, but it wasn't quite so overt as this session is. In fact, when episode 27 opens, the other players basically turn to Percy and ask him what he wants to do about the Briarwood situation, and it takes a while for them to convince him to take the lead on that storyline because it should be his decision how they handle it. Yes, he's absolutely had some of his more iconic moments in episode 25, but I think the party was kind of struggling to figure out how they were going to strike a balance of honoring his story without making him the de facto main character for what would essentially wind up being the rest of the calendar year. And given how iconic the Briarwood storyline is, I think it's safe to say that they found a good balance of making sure Percy was staying in the spotlight of the story arc, but also making sure that other players still got a chance to shine in every session. And that wasn't just something that Matt had to figure out. The entire group had to work together to make sure that Percy was given the space to react to everything in the story the way he wanted to, but also to make sure that the spotlight was still being put on other characters from time to time. Now, this game with Vin Diesel obviously has some very different demands on it, even considering the fact that this game is here to highlight Vin Diesel and bring him back to the table and give him a good experience playing the game that he loves. I can also imagine that in a 2-hour game, there would have been more of an opportunity for the rest of the party to do some interesting stuff. And in a minute, we'll talk about some of the ways the other players help to spotlight Vin Diesel throughout the session and give him a chance to be a badass. More on that in a second. But right now, I want to talk about the way that Matt is spotlighting Vin Diesel. Again, this makes perfect sense when you're literally being paid to do press for a movie, but this also brings up another question. If you're running a game for a specific player for a special occasion or because they requested it, do you make them the main character? I think it depends on the circumstance and it depends on the player. For example, when Matt ran his first game with this group of players for Liam's birthday, it doesn't at all sound like it was structured around Liam's character or intended to give him the focus or give him the spotlight more often. It seems like the birthday was just a good excuse to put together an ensemble game, a typical D&D one-shot. On the other hand, a friend of mine once recruited me to run a birthday game for them, and her best friend was basically my point of contact, someone to figure out the logistics for the party itself, but also somebody I could bounce ideas off of because she knew the birthday girl a lot better than I did. And this way, I could basically figure out the premise for the game and figure out what kind of experience the birthday girl might want, but I wouldn't be spoiling any surprises for the birthday girl herself. I keep saying birthday girl. These were adults, we were all adults, but birthday woman just sounds so weird. But anyway, the best friend and I decided to make the birthday girl's D&D character basically the main character of the session. She would be a princess and everyone else would be part of her entourage. And I think that was the right choice for the tone of that game. But even at the beginning of that session, some of the other players who had a little bit more experience with D&D than the guest of honor did, or even than the best friend did, they were having a hard time figuring out what role they should serve in the game. I think part of it is just because I didn't know any of those players very well. That's always going to be a problem when you're running a one-shot for your friend and their friends. And I honestly think the beginning of that session was a little slower than it should have been because of decisions I made. I should have moved some of the more dramatic story beats further forward in the session, have a little more action up front. But I think the question of whether or not to spotlight any specific players and how often to do so is a reasonable one when you've been essentially recruited to run a game for them, especially if you're being paid. Ginny D has been making some fantastic videos about the life of a paid game master, and that's something I've done a little bit of back before my kid was born. It's something I want to do more of in the future. And in my experience, and in the experience of the GMs that Ginny interviewed, players who pay for you to run D&D games for them usually don't want you to take it easy on them. They want you to curate a really exciting experience, and often that means including lots of dangerous threats. If you spend money on a video game that you're excited to challenge you, like a Diablo game or something, or Hades 2, and it winds up being trivially easy to get through, people are going to want to return that game. But I do think there's a difference between taking it easy on your group and making one player the focus of the game. Those are not the same thing. When I ran games on Start Playing, everyone at the party was paying for the game, so it wouldn't make sense for any one of them to be the main character. That's just not fair. When I was being paid to run a birthday game for one person who wanted a sort of princess-themed game but with margaritas, it did make sense to make that person the character that this story was revolving around. But whatever solution you land on for your own games, you still have to make sure the other players have an opportunity to take the spotlight if they want it. The reason the beginning of my birthday session was a little slow and boring is because there were lots of opportunities for one player to do a cool thing, but not a lot of combat, not until the end of the session. And combat is typically where every player gets a chance to shine. The obstacles at the beginning weren't spread out enough to give other players the opportunity to jump in and feel cool. The final 30 minutes of the session wound up being a really exciting and deadly combat encounters, and suddenly, players who've been having an okay to not great time for the past hour were completely invested. They were coming up to me after the game and talking about how much they would love to play with me again. They'd completely forgotten that they'd been a little bit miserable for much more of the game than they'd enjoyed, because at the end the danger was heightened. It didn't feel like I was holding anybody's hands, and it was an intense battle where everybody needed to act or they would all die, which means they all got something to do. So should you focus a session on one specific player if it's for a special occasion that is also centered on that player? Well, I think that's a fun thing to do if the session lends itself well to that scenario. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But you have to make sure you don't fall into the trap that I did. You have to make sure the other players are given an opportunity to play the game alongside that one player you want to spotlight. It's completely fine to say that Calder assembled this group of adventurers, but it wouldn't feel fun for the other players if he was the only person you ever turned to do anything during the game. That probably sounds obvious if you've been watching my channel for a long time. It's something I talk about a lot, but it's a lesson I kind of had to learn the hard way. And my point is that these ideas are not incompatible. You can still make somebody the de facto protagonist by saying that they're the ones who put all this together. This adventure is structured around some part of their lifestyle or their backstory or a job that's important to them, as long as you don't also sideline the other players, like I did for that one shot. Of course, this also works best if the other players also know that you're going to structure this adventure around one specific player character and their backstory or whatever. With that birthday game, I didn't know any of the other players except for the birthday girl, and I had a lot of conversations with the best friend who helped me organize the event, so she knew that it was going to be structured around the birthday girl's character, but I didn't get the chance to pass that message along to any of the other players because I wasn't handling the logistics. It just didn't occur to me to touch base with the best friend about that, but honestly, I should have thought of that. I should have asked her for that message to be passed along to the other players, that this was going to be, basically, they were going to be members of the princess's entourage. I was kind of going to focus on her. I also should have made sure to include them in other ways, but I also should have tempered their expectations. Now, these days, we'd all get on a group chat or a Discord server. I would make sure to give them a little brief before the game and make sure they created characters that were designed to fit into that scenario. That's a lesson I've learned since then. You can still do a lot of Session Zero stuff electronically through Discord servers or group texts and pass along enough information that people are more prepared when they get to the game. But when I'm putting together a group, especially for a session where I want to spotlight one specific player, I'm really going to want to make sure the other players at the table are also good at sharing the spotlight, which is probably why Matt recruited Travis and Laura to the game. He knew that they were generous scene partners. I think that's actually true of most of the players on Critical Role. In fact, the one who I think it's the least true about was about to have his last session with the group later that week. But I think Travis and Laura are good choices specifically because you know Travis is going to fill the blank spaces and push buttons when something needs to get done during the game. Travis is not going to let the game slow down or grind to a halt. That's just never going to happen with him at the table. So if Vin Diesel does not step up and take the spotlight, Travis will seize it and keep the game moving. But you also want somebody who's going to be able to balance him out, but also still keep the game moving forward. As much as I love players like Sam and Marisha and Liam, I could easily imagine any of them getting pulled into the idea of exploring the dramatic or comedic potential of a particular moment, and that would give the other players something to respond to in terms of role-playing. In that way, I still think they are generous scene partners. But for this specific session, you also need players who are going to invite other players to play with them while also keeping the story moving forward. And I don't think you can ask for two better fits for that than Travis and Laura. Because Laura is a good strategist, but she also doesn't waste a whole lot of time on prep if they're under a time crunch. She can just offer a suggestion to do something like, let's sneak, or send the strong guy first if those ideas don't occur to Vin Diesel. And then you have Jessica and Dan from Nerdist, both of whom were on-air personalities. They were probably selected because the Nerdist audience would be more familiar with them, but I believe both of them have done quite a lot of interviews with celebrities, so they knew how to make sure to fill the empty space and make sure things don't get awkward and how to spotlight a guest of honor. They also know how to step back and allow that subject to do cool things themselves. So they are good choices to help round out this table. And as the game opens proper, we can actually see in action just how good these players are at sharing the spotlight. The party approaches this village just as the sun is setting, and there's a house nearby with a light inside. Vex peers in the window, and there you go, that's not a major move, but it's still a choice made for the group that moves the story forward and gets them all more information. It's something any of them could have said, but she happens to be the one to say it. I think Laura is really good at that. And then they decide to knock, and they think it makes the most sense for Vin Diesel to be the one to knock on the door. He's the main character. They all want to make sure that he's being the most proactive member. But he's still a little bit unsure.
Who's knocking?
Leader.
Am I knocking? Is that what we're doing?
If you'd like to.
Did this turn into Calder the Knocker?
Every journey begins with a single knock.
Well, I can't be surprised. So, I guess I'm...
Shouldn't we like perception the house or something first?
Maybe.
Okay.
I feel like we're walking into...
Go ahead and roll a perception check.
Yeah, I will.
I love the way Jessica picked up on the fact that Vin Diesel was unsure if knocking was the right move, and she clocked that it wasn't just nerves or being uncertain about how the game works. That happens a lot with new players. They're especially gun shy. Even if they're played the game a long time ago and they're coming back to it, they're still just a little bit unsure of what the right move is. But the fact that he looked down and saw that he can't be surprised, she realized that basically means he was expecting something bad to happen when he knocked. She picks up on the fact that they're all feeling like there's some potential danger here, but they weren't sure how to make sure that was the case. So she jumps in and says, let's actually look around first and make sure everything's safe. Matt then takes that prompt, but pivots back to Vin Diesel, and so instead of knocking on the door, now he's asked to roll a perception check. So he still gets to contribute, he still gets to be the one taking action, but he's not forced to knock when he feels like that may not be the smartest move. Now, this perception check tells them that the door is not covered with moss like everything else seems to be, so this door is newer than the rest of the building. The players don't really know what to do with that information, though. It's clearly a clue, but they don't really know what it's meant to imply. So we haven't really solved the problem of reluctance. You know what we need? We need a button pusher.
Well, at least she cleans the door.
I mean, is everybody all hesitant? I'll knock.
All right, okay.
Let me show you how we do this. And I go up and I pound on the door real hard.
The sound echoes through the interior and you hear a voice go, "Ah!" on the other side.
The woman answers the door, and Grog literally turns to the rest of the group and says,
I don't do well with emotions. I'm really the group knocker. Somebody else want to take it from here.
Are you upset, dear? What's been happening here?
Again, we have a great move here from Travis. He took the spotlight so the story would move forward, and now he's handing it off to see if anybody else will grab it. And Laura takes it immediately because I think, first of all, she wants to move the story forward, but also, I think she wants to demonstrate to Vin Diesel that you can just start jumping in whenever you want to. I'm sure he also feels a little uncomfortable that everyone keeps turning to him and waiting for him to do stuff when he's not sure what to do himself, but I think he needed a little bit of coaxing to demonstrate that you can just start saying stuff and the GM will honor it. I can't speak to what his dynamic was like when he used to play D&D, but I imagine he used to know that. Like, he probably knows that intellectually, but he's at a new table, he hasn't played in like a decade, and he's a little bit shy right now. But as I start talking with this NPC, he starts asking questions about the curse. It's a good start. It's drawing him out of his shell. Now, at first, this woman tells them, leave, run away, save yourselves. But when they don't do that, when they say they want to help solve this problem, she starts explaining. She says that they hear strange voices in the swamp sometimes, laughter, strange burbling, moaning. So she offers them some money to help deal with this problem, and she agrees to show them the way to the ruins. This is the first time she's mentioned ruins, but I think that's just because Matt is rushing a little bit. Understandably, given the circumstances. They enter the swamp together, and Matt says they march through the muck for an hour, and then he calls for a perception check from everyone. They all roll terribly except for Grog and Calder. So Matt narrates that the two of them start seeing these faces in the fog, briefly laughing and then vanishing. And Matt says that Calder sees a spectral form appear behind Vex, preparing to attack her. He's handing the spotlight to Vin Diesel, telling him he sees something no one else does, a monster about to attack one of his allies. And Vin Diesel attacks. They roll for initiative, Calder goes first, and there are 2 wraiths to attack. He lights up his sword with fire, attacks twice, and rolls decently well, although this is a nice benefit of playing a level 8 character. You have decent modifiers, and a spectral undead does not tend to have a very high armor class in the first place. These are excellent foes to put in front of your players when you want your players to hit monsters and feel cool. He does about 28 damage, plus the 5 from the attack before they rolled initiative, so altogether he kills the wraith. Now that's a lot less hit points than the wraith typically has, but obviously, if you're running out of time for your one-shot game, reducing monster health is a fantastic way to keep the session moving. I actually thought that they weren't even wraiths at all, but I actually have seen Matt's session notes for this game, so I do know that they are wraiths. He just cut their hit points dramatically. And the creature's health is also not so low that it doesn't still take a couple of hits to bring it down. It's a really good level for this party. The Headmistress and Grog attack the second wraith, but they don't do enough damage to kill it. So on the wraith's turn, it attacks Grog and deals 21 damage, lowering his max hit points by that amount, so he can't heal back up. That feels like a really big deal. It scares the players, it makes them feel like they're in genuine danger. But this party also doesn't have a healer, and they're definitely not taking a short rest in this 20-minute session, so in the long term, this won't really affect the game too radically. Grog was not going to heal from that damage either way. And also, this wraith attacked the Barbarian, who easily has the most hit points, which is basically the same thing as wasting your turn as a bad guy. But Matt isn't running a game of Critical Role. He doesn't have to bring all of his tricks and tactics to the game because he's not really trying to challenge a party of people who are ready for him. This is not the fight with Kevdak or Ripley or Raishan. But it still makes the players scared because now they know that these ghosts are no chumps. At this point, a third wraith appears as well, although Matt doesn't have it attack this turn. Now, this is a fantastic way to give the players lots of enemies to attack, but not overwhelm them by having them take too much damage. With 2 wraiths on the field right now, one of which has taken some damage and the other is untouched, but these wraiths have already taken their turns and now the entire party can go, you're basically guaranteeing that all of your players are going to get a chance to do something cool. It's kind of a way to put your thumb on the scale in your players' favor, which can be kind of cheap, but also it's a nice little trick to make the players feel like they're contributing when the fight might otherwise go so quickly that half the party doesn't get a chance to attack at all. If this third wraith had not shown up, it's possible Vex could kill the second wraith and DuPont would get to do literally nothing at all. But by bringing in a third wraith, you're guaranteeing that everyone gets a chance to play the game. I might want to remember this trick the next time my players start carving through bad guys so quickly that I realize an encounter will be finished before the first round is over and 2 of my players haven't even had a chance to act yet. I'll just slide another bad guy onto the field and I'll imply that it took them their action to enter the field, but really all I'm doing is giving them one more target to hit and feel cool. As we can see in this example, they don't have enough hit points for it to be a huge problem for the players, but at least it will give the other players a chance to contribute to the fight when they otherwise might not have had a chance to do so. In fact, Matt actually, like I said, posted his session notes from this session. The link is dead these days, but I have my own copy saved, so we know that he was only planning on using 2 wraiths. But he introduced this third one during the session because it would help the pacing of the game, and I think it was exactly the right call. Because sure enough, just like I predicted, Vex finishes off the second wraith, which means DuPont would have gotten nothing to do, but instead, because there's a third wraith, he attacks and does 25 damage, not quite enough to kill it. And now it turns back to glare at the rogue who just stabbed it, making it clear that DuPont is about to get murdered if someone doesn't finish off this wraith. And sure enough, Calder attacks the monster with a Mystic Blast, which is a ranged attack. He rolls a natural 20, and he finishes off the wraith. The woman they brought with them says Calder's magic is strange and ancient and asks what he is, and this gives Vin Diesel the chance for his character to introduce himself as a witch hunter, which is very convenient considering this whole event was put together to promote a movie called The Last Witch Hunter. Well done, Matt. I see you. She says she's going to stay next to him for the rest of the journey because he can clearly protect her. They keep journeying through the swamp, and they come upon a castle that is ruined and has sunk into the swamp. In the middle of the ruin, there's a large stone table, much like the one they're playing at, but made of stone. I always love when a GM will pull in references to the room you're actually in to help get a sense of what's happening in the game. It's probably the fastest way to get everyone on the same page about the scale of something. Some GMs are really weird about this too, just using real-world terminology sometimes to describe something. When they're like, oh, I can't describe this giant's eye as the eye of a basketball because basketballs don't exist in this world. Yeah, but we all know what a basketball is. I mean, if you're playing for an American audience, maybe not so much if you're more international, but we all know what a basketball is and roughly how big it is. We were all forced to try to play with them in high school. We were all terrible at it least I was. Just say that something's the size of a basketball if that's the most appropriate analogy. Don't worry about trying to evoke the same mental image without relying on the tools you actually have, which is the world around you. And especially doing so in the actual world around you, the actual room you're in, is fantastic. You don't have to wonder if your players realize, oh, how big is a football field? If I'm picturing that right, I think I am, so that's how far away they are. No, it's the distance of the room we're in, it's the table that we're at. Fantastic. Do that more. That's how I feel. But unlike the table they're actually at, this table is covered with shards of bones and trinkets and fresh blood from the past couple of days. Vin Diesel actually clocks this as something sacrificial. That's what it sounds like to him, and Matt confirms that. And as they get close, the moonlight around them fades and gets very dim. Calder lights a torch, but even that torchlight is getting pretty dim. I don't think Matt intended this, but it's almost like this room is starting to be very, very dark. Like, as dark as something can be. I can't think of another way to describe that. But in all seriousness, this does remind me a lot of another Vin Diesel movie where he's part of a team of people all trying to stay alive in an unfamiliar landscape, relying on each other, even though in the movie they all do kind of hate each other, and they have to be cautious because any mistake they make might give away their location to the enemy, who could literally be around any corner and could jump out and surprise them at any moment and kill one of them. And we watch our heroes try to get to their destination and get out of this horrible situation while monsters pick them off one by one. It's honestly one of the best Vin Diesel movies. You know the movie. Saving Private Ryan. They begin to hear whispering, spooky voices around them, and the headmistress tries to confront the woman who brought them here because it's starting to feel like this might be a trap, but they can't find her. It's too dark. And then they start to hear some more voices.
You hear a voice come out from the darkness upon the other side of the ritual table you're standing at.
We're all gonna die.
How eager they are to walk on, unknowing they come to seat of their destiny.
Another voice comes from behind. It's the voice of the young woman following you. An offering of outsider blood.
Oh, I knew it! I knew it!
Cleans the palate, the tastes to come.
Shall we begin the next offering, dear sister?
Yes, we shall. And the woman steps out of the darkness, her head turned to the side, and you see her form shimmer. And behind it, you see her flesh extend as her arms grow overly long, her form large and hunched, this disgusting-looking swamp hat-like vision. As she looks forward and cackles, a second one of the same type physical presence steps on the opposite side of the ritual table, surrounding you.
Winch Hunter, it seems you've come to your final bout.
What do you want to do?
Ooh, I like this. Attack!
That's why the woman tried to get them away, tried to send them off to save themselves because she didn't want them to get involved. And when they wouldn't leave, she suddenly pulled out money. I remember thinking that was strange, and then I realized, oh, Matt did that very deliberately. Now, obviously, I'm not advocating that your game should be as short as this one is, but it did kind of work out nicely that while some of the players definitely suspected that they shouldn't trust this woman, there really wasn't time for them to act on that, which means the betrayal can still land because they never had a chance to force the truth out of her or interrogate her. Matt made some very clever choices about what to cut from this adventure. And this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with when they're running one-shots in general. Myself absolutely included in that category. When we prep a one-shot, we don't know how long it's actually going to take for our players to get through whatever we've prepared. And so a lot of times we might be getting close to the end of the session time, but we're nowhere near the end of the adventure. I made a video earlier this year about a spicy session of D&D that I ran, and I talked about the same problem there because that was the number one issue I had with that session. It was just, I had too much story and other content for the amount of time that we had based on how long it took the beginning of the session to play out. And so a good rule of thumb is to try to get a read on how fast things are moving during the session itself and start cutting things from the middle of your adventure before you get to them, so you can make sure the players get to their epic conclusion at the end of the adventure and skip over the stuff that you cut. Mike Shea from the Sly Flourish channel has talked about this a lot. He runs a lot more one-shots than I do, and it seems like he's figured out how to feel out the pacing as you're currently running the game, so you can start cutting scenes mid-game from the middle that you think would slow down the game too much, so you can still make sure there's time for the final fight. Obviously, Matt Mercer had to cut quite a lot with very little notice, but he still made sure, it seems to me at least, like he was cutting from the middle. However, even at this point, I think they were still running up against their time limit. We're 25 minutes into a session that he was told he had 20 minutes for, but Matt still figured out another way to get through this fight very quickly without cutting the fight entirely. First of all, he doesn't have them roll initiative, he just has Vin Diesel attack first. You can make the case that maybe he's using the same initiative as before, but obviously he's hoping Vin Diesel is going to be able to kill off this hag quickly and feel like a badass, for lots of reasons. Vin Diesel rolls a 17 with his first attack, and a natural 20 for his second.
Guys, I don't make this up.
All right.
I'm going to roll a couple of 20s.
All right, go
It's
roll.
all 20s.
And before we proceed, I just want to address the elephant in the room. Did Vin Diesel really roll 2 natural 20s? I think the answer is yes. First of all, this is not a commercial for D&D, it's a commercial for a movie. Having Vin Diesel roll a natural 20 doesn't really help sell the movie. Second, Matt had already done other work to make sure these fights would be over quickly. We talked about some of those techniques already. He cut down the hit points, he made sure that they weren't acting as strategically as maybe they could have. You don't need to stage a natural 20 to get through these fights faster. In fact, trying to stage these natural 20s would actually make the session take even longer because you have to figure out the logistics and then cut stuff out. Third, if the joy of this session comes from seeing Vin Diesel get to play this game again for the first time, you'd be denying him the opportunity of actually rolling and having fun by having him roll fake numbers. And fourth, and this is the big one, I don't want to sound mean, but do you want to rely on Vin Diesel's acting skills to sell a natural 20? I'm not saying he's a bad actor. I'm saying that showing a lot of enthusiasm isn't really his strong suit. He tends to play much more stoic characters, and for a good reason. His reaction whenever he rolls a natural 20 is actually very out of character for his public persona and his movie star persona. The last time I saw him this excited about something was when he was selling Street Shark action figures. Also, while I understand why some people would believe that the actors would stage their roles, I actually believe in something else more. Beginner's luck. More times than I can count, I've seen a new player come to the table and start rolling insanely hot. I used to run an actual play podcast where we would bring guests in to play D&D, often for the first time, and I saw this happen a bunch. We got to play with Seychelle Gabriel, the voice of Asami from The Legend of Korra, and she rolled some very well-placed natural 20s. Even just a couple of months ago, I got to play in a one-shot live stream to raise money for the Trevor Project, and we had one player who had never played D&D before, so we did a warm-up session offline, maybe a week before the live stream. And her first roll was a natural 20. And her first roll of the live stream was also a natural 20. In fact, across those two games, the warm-up and the live stream, she rolled something like 3 natural 20s. I'm not superstitious when it comes to dice. Except I do believe in beginner's luck. I do believe new players sometimes just roll extremely well because they're new players. And I honestly, even though Vin Diesel is not technically a new player, I do think that's what happened in this game. Also, I'm not dice superstitious, but I do leave all the dice facing with their highest side facing up, so they learn what side's supposed to be up. But I'm not dice superstitious, don't get the wrong idea. So, Calder does 12 damage with his first attack, and then 29 with his critical, which obviously gives Matt the opportunity to ask Vin Diesel how he wants to do this. But there's still one more thing to deal with. How is Matt going to get through this ending without winding up in a whole initiative scene? There's one more hag left over. Should he even try to do this through a fight? Because you're not going to be able to beat this critical. That was an epic kill, and you're now running the risk you're going to get this diminishing return. And Matt's solution is honestly one of my favorite moments from this session overall.
The other hag, who had just revealed, turns and goes,
Another time, then.
backs out, seemingly very frightened by the fact that you just instantaneously disabled her sister.
Yeah, run.
Disappears in the
What's
darkness. The moonlight creeps in again as the shadow that seemed to have consumed the vicinity seems to fade. You're now left amongst these cold ruins, the tension and curse seemingly now vanishing.
Yeah, the other witch just runs away. It's logically what she would do in that scenario. She wouldn't hang around to get murdered. And this also leaves an opening for another session with Vin Diesel if he wants to come back and promote The Last Witch Hunter, if that movie had ever happened. But also, it just helps the session feel awesome and badass with this climactic ending that you were not going to be able to beat if they'd also gotten into initiative and one player had gotten to attack this witch. Matt describes how they see greenery in life returning to the swamp. They get back to town and find all these desperate villagers emerging from their homes and being grateful and giving them even more gold. And at the end, Matt turns to the camera and gives this dramatic ending description about how they slayed this monster but what other threats might be out there in this world? And that's definitely something he had to do after Vin Diesel had already left because they definitely ran out of time with him. And if you're part of the Critical Role community, you probably already know this part, but there was apparently this huge outcry from fans who wanted to see the class that Matt had made for Vin Diesel. But obviously the version he had put together for this game was very, very basic because he wanted to keep things as simple as possible for a new player, who he had very little time with. But when you have D&D fans asking you for a new class, you also want to take it seriously. Matt's also a big fan of The Witcher 3, so I think he liked the idea of polishing this concept and making his own sort of monstrous monster hunter class. So the session essentially inspired him to create the Blood Hunter. It doesn't share much DNA with the Witch Hunter we saw in this game, but it is much more fleshed out and more thorough. He posted it on the DMs Guild, he got a whole lot of feedback, he made some revisions, but he really took this seriously as a design challenge. The Blood Hunter has some subclasses for different core fantasies, he commissioned art from one of the Critical Role fan artists. It really was Matt Mercer's first step towards becoming a designer of third-party D&D material. We'll be back soon to talk about episode 82 of Critical Role. In this episode, Vox Machina sets out on their mission to hunt down Raishan, the ancient green dragon and the final boss of the Chroma Conclave storyline. So keep your eyes peeled for that video next week.
Oh, really? Because you said you were going to get this video out last week. You missed the deadline. Again. You were supposed to get a new Demystified video out every week, and you broke our agreement.
I didn't agree to anything. You put a curse on me.
Well, you definitely shouldn't have broken one of those.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It doesn't actually matter, because there's nothing you can actually do to me. Because this is my channel. I make the videos I want to make, I talk about the topics I want to talk about. I love the Demystified videos, I have a lot of fun making them, but I also want to talk about other stuff, and you can't do anything about that.
If you made weekly Demystified videos, you could get your subscriber count up a lot faster.
I'm sure that's true, but honestly, I have other videos I want to make as well, so if I miss a week for a Demystified video, there's nothing wrong with that.
Of course there is! I'm an algorithm wizard. I don't care which videos you want to make, you make the videos I tell you to make.
Or what? This is my channel, you can't take it away from me.
Oh, can't I?
What? What did you do? Did you just change my profile picture?
Your channel belongs to me. You have an audience because I brought them to you. You do whatever you want to curate your audience, to make the videos they want to see, that's all well and good. But you're not in control of this situation. I am. You make the videos you want? Fine. But you also make the videos I want. Don't you forget that.